Alright, today we are changing things up. We're going to be talking about shapes. I put on the agenda that you needed to have certain pages torn out and you're going to cut up the shapes here. Okay, for our lessons, the real important ones are going to be all these rectangles, okay, and squares here. You're going to just cut along the dotted lines as carefully as you can. If you need help, if you're someone who might end up maybe cutting big chunks out of them, maybe have an adult help you cut them up, and when you do finish cutting them up, you're going to want to put them in a zip bag so that you can keep them. We're going to be using them for a couple lessons. So we have these shapes here. We also have these shapes on this page. Along with having these shapes cut out, you also need to have the page 217. It's for lesson 7-6. Okay, it looks like this. Today we're actually just going to be doing this page together, and you don't have extra work to do on the side. So as long as you're doing this, this will be your math for the day. All right, so we're going to start by talking about shapes. So if you haven't gotten those, by the way, yet, go ahead and pause the video, get yourself ready, and you could be looking at the shapes that I have. We're going to be focusing first on all of the you can put the circles away. So go ahead and look at the shapes that I'm putting out, okay, on this table here, on this board. And I want you to notice what are the things that are the same and what are the things that are different about these shapes that are here on this board. So what are some things that are the same about all of these shapes? You may notice that they all have these pointy corners, okay? And most of you would say that these are rectangles, okay, and that these two here are squares. Well, let's talk about what makes a rectangle and a square. All right, so a rectangle, I'm going to go ahead, and most of you would decide that this is a rectangle and this is a square. So we can see that this is just another version of a square, and these are all just different versions of rectangles. So I'm going to hold on to these two while we're going over the rules for squares and rectangles. I'm going to put the other ones away, so I'm just going to set them aside. Okay, now let's look at these two shapes. Let's talk about first the rectangle. Okay, now the rectangle has four corners. In fact, we call them square corners. Square corners are when the two edges are exactly what we call perpendicular. So it really looks like the corner of a square. In older grades, we call that a right angle. We also call it a 90-degree angle. Okay, so those are other terms you're going to hear. In first grade, we kind of use the term a square corner. So a square corner would be like the edge of a book. A square corner would also be like the edge of a paper. All right, so real sharp, and they are perpendicular to each other. So four corners. So let's look at that. We're going to add that as one of our first rules here. Okay, they all have four square corners. Now, what's another feature that you notice about this? You may notice that it also has four sides. Okay, it has four sides. So all rectangles have four square corners. All rectangles have four sides. Now, another feature that you don't usually think about when you're thinking of rectangles, but we have talked a little bit about it, is that all rectangles have to be closed shapes. Now, remember in class when we briefly talked about this, we were talking about how the shapes, like having a puppy in a cage. If you had a cage that was like this, okay, you'll see, let's look at the definition. Does it have four square corners? Why, yes it does. Does it have four sides? Well, kind of, 1, 2, 3, 4, but maybe you might actually count these as different sides. But most importantly, is it closed? So if you had your doggy in this cage right here, in this fence, would he be able to get out? Yes, he'd be able to get out. So this is not a rectangle. You wouldn't call that a rectangle. Okay, it's close if you have a gate on there, maybe, right? But with it open or nothing closing is off, it's not a closed shape. So you need to actually have all of it together. All right, so it would have to be all four corners, okay, four sides, and there's no place for anything to get out if that were a fence. All right. All right, I'm going to set this aside, and I want you to look at the square that I have here. Okay, and let's look at the definitions for a rectangle and see if the square meets any of those same definitions. All right, let's look at this. Does it have 4 square corners? So look at these corners. Are the corners the same kind of corners? Yes, they are the same kinds of corners. Okay, does this shape have 4 sides? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, it has 4 sides. And is it a closed shape? Yes, it is. If we drew that on our piece of paper, it would, if I traced it, in fact, let's go ahead and just do that. If I put this on my paper and I traced it all the way around with my pen, I know my pen is going to overlap a little bit, might not be perfect on the corner sides there, okay? But the idea is, if you looked at that, is it a closed shape? Yes, it is a closed shape. So what does that mean about a square? It is also a rectangle. So squares are special kind of rectangles. Okay? All right, so let's talk about a square. So a square has all the same rules as the rectangles do. So it has the same ones. They have all these same rules, but there's something extra about a square. A square can only be called a square if all the sides are the same length. So notice how this side is the same length as that side. Okay, that is what makes it be a square. So really, you could say that this shape is a square, and someone else could say this shape is a rectangle, and both of them would be correct. This shape is both. It is both a rectangle and a square. Okay, let's go ahead and look at this shape again. Is this a square? Most of you right away would say no. Okay, but let's talk about why it's not a square. So let's first look at here. It says, does it have all the same rules as a rectangle? So does it have 4 square corners? Yes. Does it have 4 sides? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, it does. Is it a closed shape? Yes, it is. So far it's definitely a rectangle, okay, because it has all the rules for it. Let's look at this rule, though, for a square. All the sides are the same length. Are all these sides the same length? No, they're not. This side is much shorter than this side here. So it is not a square. If someone said this is a square and someone else said that this is a rectangle, the person that said it's a rectangle is the only one that's correct. This cannot be called a square because the sides are not the same length. Okay? All right, let's go ahead. You should have had out the page that I was mentioning earlier, okay, for lesson 7-6. Is page 217. We're going to go through these problems together. Should be nice and easy. All right. So the number 1 wants to know which shapes are not rectangles or squares. So we have to cross out anything that's not a rectangle and that's not a square. And let's figure out why it doesn't work. Okay, so we're going to keep asking ourselves these questions as we're going through them, just to practice with the rules. All right, so let's look at this shape. Does it have 4 square corners? Yes. Does it have 4 sides? Yes. Is it a closed shape? Yes. So far, it's a rectangle, right? So we're definitely not going to cross it off. Just for fun, let's see if it's also a square. Are all the sides the same length? Yes, they are. So we would call this a square, actually, and we're going to leave it alone. Okay, let's look at this shape next. Let's ask ourselves, does it have 4 square corners? Yes, it does. How about 4 sides? Yes, again. Is it a closed shape? Yes. All right, so it's definitely a rectangle. We're definitely going to leave it alone. Let's see, though, if it's also a square, okay? So to be a square, it needs to have all the same sides the same length. So look at this side and this side and this side. Are they the same length? Yes, they are. So this is called a square. Some of you might be saying, no, it's a diamond. Well, if you turn it this way and look at it, what does it look like to you now? It's a square. It doesn't matter which direction it's going on how it's placed on the paper. It just matters whether or not it's following the rules. Okay, so this is actually a square. Now let's look at this one. Does it have 4 square corners? Well, it doesn't even really have a corner here at all, so it doesn't match that one. Does it have 4 sides? 1, 2, 3, 4. It does have 4 sides. Is it a closed shape? No, it's not a closed shape. So 2 of the rules weren't being followed. So we're going to cross that one out. All right, how about right here? Does it have 4 square corners? Yep. Does it have 4 sides? Yep. And is it a closed shape? Yep. So it's definitely a rectangle. Let's ask ourselves, does it have all the sides the same? No, it doesn't have all the sides the same, but it is still a rectangle. So this is definitely a rectangle. We're going to leave it alone. Okay, how about this shape? Does it have 4 square corners? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It has 6 corners. They're definitely not square, so already I know I can cross that out. Okay, it is a closed shape, right? But it doesn't have 4 sides and it doesn't have 4 square corners. Let's look at this one. Does it have 4 corners? Yes. 4 sides? Yes. Is it closed? Yes. Definitely a rectangle. Does it have 4 equal sides? No, it's not a square, but it is definitely a rectangle. We're going to leave it alone. How about this one? 4 sides? No, it does not have 4 sides. Okay, I've got too used to putting my thumb up there. No, it does not have 4 corners. It does not have 4 sides. It is closed, but it doesn't have the 4 of the sides and the corners, so we're going to cross that one out. Okay, let's look at this one. Does it have 4 square corners? Yes, it does. Does it have 4 sides? Yes, it does. Is it a closed shape? Yes, it is. Now, most of you might say, well, and so it is a rectangle. And most of you might think that doesn't look like a rectangle, but again, if you turn it this way, now does it look like a rectangle you'd be thinking of? Yes, and again, it just matters what the rules are, not the direction that it's facing on the paper. So this is definitely a rectangle. Does it have 4 equal sides? No, it doesn't have 4 equal sides. So this one's still a rectangle, it's just not a square, but we're going to leave it alone. So now you can see which ones we've crossed off. All right, now for number 2, it wants us to draw the shape according to the directions that it tells us, okay? It wants us to draw something that has 4 sides and 4 square corners. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video, and can you draw a shape that has 4 sides and 4 square corners? All right, you should have drawn that on your own. Let's see what you came up with. Some of you may have drawn this, or some version of it. Okay, this would be a rectangle, right? Now, here's the funny thing. Some of you could have also drawn this. Are those people correct? Well, does it have 4 sides? Yes, it does. Does it have 4 square corners? Yes, it does. So this definition, by what they wanted you to draw, you could have drawn either kind. You could have drawn just a regular rectangle, or you could have drawn the special rectangle of a square. Now let's look at number 3 though. It wants 4 sides that are the same length and 4 square corners. Go ahead and pause the video, and can you draw a shape that is 4 sides that are the same length and 4 square corners? All right, you should have unpaused the video. This one, you had to have drawn a square. Okay, it doesn't matter what size the square was, but to follow the rules of this definition, you needed to have a square because it asked for the same length. All right, go ahead and turn the paper over. All right, so now I'm going to have you finish the rest of this. I'm going to explain it to you, but you're going to draw the shapes on your own. Okay, so I'll give you the directions, but you do it on your own. So you're going to look at each of these shape things, okay, and you're going to do your best drawing. You're going to put anything in here that are squares in this one, and if you have crayons or colored pencils, that would be good too, because it will let me know which thing you were trying to draw. And you're going to put it in that exact direction too. So for example, this shape, I'm not going to tell you what it is, but for this shape you would try your best to kind of draw it the same way. See how it's kind of angled on the paper? And maybe even try to color it. You're going to put all the squares in this box. You're going to draw anything that is a rectangle, but it's not a square. So just plain rectangles that are not squares go here. Over here, you're going to put any of these objects that are not squares or rectangles. So anything that is not a rectangle would go here. Okay, not a rectangle and not a square. All right, good luck.